Sahana vavatu, sahanao bhunaktu, sahaviryang karavavahai, tejasvina vadhitamastu, ma vidvishawahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Chapter 16, we have spoken about two main topics. One of them is Daiva Sampat. These are the qualities that ensue or that we can observe when we are in harmony with the whole, when we are in harmony with ourselves, our outer environment, our inner atmosphere. And we have spoken about Asura Sampat. These qualities are observed when we are opposed to that Daiva Sampat, when things feel off, when something doesn't feel right. Then we asked, what is the cause of that? What is the cause of anger? What is the cause of confusion? What is the cause of doubts? What's the cause of inadequacy, feeling not good enough? No matter how much we have, how much we know, we don't feel quite good enough. What is the cause of bitterness? What is the cause of all of this? All of these tendencies that distance us from what we know to be true, what we are known to be right. The answer would be is these Daiva, the opposition to Daiva Sampat, which is Asura, and which are Rajasic qualities and Tamasic qualities. In other words, when they cloud the mind, just like when the cloud covers the sun, even though the sun is still shining, even though wisdom is still speaking through the mind, it's not like the wisdom is gone. It's just that it's covered by something. So that what is that something? Asura Sampat is what chapter 16 is expounding. We also spoke about last week when we look through a partial lens, like looking at a car, then we can only see limited information. And that limited information makes us make limited conclusions. In other words, your wisdom determines what kind of decisions you can make. The more wisdom we have that are in line with the truth, the greater, the more refined our decisions can be. So really, we are educating ourselves. We are acquiring this wisdom to remove these clouds from our minds. Therefore, we can start to act rationally, and we can start to see those who are in front of us. And we have also spoken last week about this Jiva Srishtihi. So Jiva Srishtihi again is an important topic, and it will keep on being repeated because the heart of chapter 16, in fact, the whole Gita is really just removal of Jiva Srishtihi, this projection, whereby I'm able to see you because the person is too busy projecting their past notions onto the now. In other words, the now is a fresh moment. It's happening right now. Everything's fine right now. That is called Ishvara Srishtihi. Every moment is fresh. It's dynamic. It's what's presented to us. But then the observer, the jiva, is looking through these lenses, these narrow lenses, and therefore they're adding meanings onto what now means. And what are some consequences whereby jiva Srishtihi is dominant? Well, we have a nice story in the Mahabharata whereby Draupadi was standing on maybe an elevated position, a balcony, and she saw Duryodhana coming out of a bath. He had a few clothes on. And so, as you know the story, before she had the moment to think, she laughed at him, and this made Duryodhana humiliated. And this also was the cause of why in the open assembly, Duryodhana wanted her to be disrobed. So in other words, we can trace this cause-effect relationship, how one thing much later fructifies into something that we ourselves find unpleasant. So that way, the more of these asura, these clouds that are dominant, these jiva srishti conditionalities, behaviors that are dominant, they are like that for Draupadi. They create unpleasant, undesirable situations later on that we regret or we wish that weren't, that we should have not, done in the past. Now, the question is, of course, well, that's not what I do. We don't go around doing this intentionally. So that's not an issue. But the issue really is when the unconscious does it anyway. So we always need to catch ourselves. And so these Daiva Asura Sampat causes us to contrast these qualities so we can become more mindful about our behaviors. There's another nice story that illustrates this tendency to impulsively act without thinking, this asuric, this tamasic quality in the Aparikshita Karakam. This is the book 5 of the Panchatantra. And there's a story, this Panchatantra has many lovely stories. I'll tell you one of them. And he has a story called the Brahmana's wife and the loyal mongoose. And so what happened was the Brahmana's wife gave birth to a young, healthy boy. And at that same, obviously it was in the house, it was in the Vedic culture. And in that same time, there was a female mongoose who gave birth to a young mongoose. And unfortunately, the female mongoose died from labor pains. And so the mother couldn't bear this, the young mongoose being abandoned like that. So she decided to care and nurture this young mongoose for some time. But all throughout, she had this doubt that one day this young mongoose may attack her biological son. So she always was skeptical and apprehensive about bringing them close. So one day, the female, the mother brought out a pitcher. It's like a clay pot, and she wanted to go to the river to fetch some water. But before she did that, she placed her son on the bed, and she entrusted her husband to take care of their son while he was laying on the bed. So the mother went over to the river, and just then a cobra slithered inside the house. But before the cobra slithered, the Brahmana, the husband, thought, well, the son will be absolutely fine. I'm just going to go out and beg for some alms. And so the husband went out begging for the alms. But just after he went out, the cobra slithered in. Now, the cobra and the mongoose, they're not good friends. So obviously the mongoose thought, it's going to hurt the little boy, because we're brothers. And so the mongoose cut the little cobra into pieces. Now, the mongoose was very proud, wanted to show its accomplishment, its feat to the mother. And so the mongoose went over to the mother and showed itself. Unfortunately, it had bloodstains on its fur and on its mouth because of the cobra. And as the mother saw this, she concluded, oh no, I knew it. My prophecy has come true. The mongoose has killed my son. And so she took the pitcher full of water and she dashed it onto the mongoose. And then the mongoose died. And then the mother ran into the house to check, thinking her son may be dead. And she found her son lying there on the bed, just as she put him. And she also saw the cobra cut into little pieces. And then she realized what she's done. She started to pound herself. She started to cry and lament. And just then the husband walked in and she started to curse the husband. She started to rebuke the husband for walking out on her. So the question now is, who's to blame? Can you see the Asura Sampat operating here? Is the mother to blame for her impulsive thinking? Or is the father to blame for walking out in the name of his alms? So we can see how these Asura Sampat are, when they're in operation, they cause both sides to assert their own reality, thinking, the mongoose killed my son, without, same thing with the father. The father walked out prematurely without really taking the whole into the account, without looking what could have or what may have happened. And thus both of them, in one sense or the other, were clouded by their own notions. We call, once again, this jiva srishtihi. And thus we can see how this operates in our own lives. So we can see from this that in both examples, projection onto the world, then further we justify, because human beings are smart. We use our smart minds to find ingenious ways to justify the status quo of our established beliefs, to justify the status quo of our old behavioral patterns. Further, we think that we're making progress, right? But in order to stay in our comfort zone, what do we say? We say, I got it. I understood this whole Advaita. I understood what Daiva Sampat is. I understood what Asura Sampat is. I got it all. But it's really just the comfort zone speaking, keeping the mind at a certain level because he doesn't want to address what else could be out there. I feel there's fear of the unknown. Thus, I stay in my defense mechanism. The defense mechanism kicks in and says, I got it. But we still made the same mistake as before. So this means that we have two conditions, what chapter 16 is telling us, two jobs, two duties. One of them is to constantly look into our decisions, look at what is the motivation behind our decisions and actions. What is the motivation behind our giving? Is there an agenda behind the giving? Is there an agenda behind this decision over that decision? What is that motivation that's making you do what you do? Is it coming from the will of God, as we call it, the will to bring harmony into the environment, or is it coming out of my own clouds that are acting in the name of likes and dislikes? And the second is we need to constantly challenge our existing framework. And how do we challenge our existing framework? By getting involved in those things that challenge us. In other words, we must be open to being challenged. The moment the person stops being challenged, we call that arrogance already. Pride of one's knowledge has come in, and it's saying, I know enough, I've heard enough, I don't need to hear anymore. Therefore, we open ourselves up to this knowledge constantly, working on our minds, working on every facet of our perception. That way, we don't fall into the story like the Brahmana's wife and the loyal mongoose. The loyal mongoose who only wanted to give good, was acting out of that purity. But because the person in front could not see such behavior as being pure, as being completely with agendaless, that loyal mongoose paid the price. Of course, that later on made the mother regret her decision. How do we apply this into a workplace, for example? How do we apply this Daiva Asura comparison or contrast in the workplace? One of the obvious things is stick with the facts. So, for example, suppose there's an argument or there's a confrontation or there's a disagreement between what you think and what the other thinks. This is common. First thing we can do is we can stick with the facts, because the moment we go out of the facts, that is already what we call asuric judgment, and we start to judge them without knowing the full facts. So we can ask them, hey, this is how I feel, for example, this is how I feel when I observe you performing this behavior. This is how it makes me feel uncomfortable. So I would like to open up a conversation with you to see if I may have misinterpreted this situation, or if there's something that you may come forward with, so I may reconsider, or I may see if what I'm thinking could be indeed true, because we don't know. So therefore, we open up a conversation, an engagement between two parties to discover. This is point one. Opening up oneself, stating how one feels in respect to something else. And that way we continue, we remain with the facts. There's one nice statement from Eckhart Tolle, actually. One of the good things I always remember him saying is, in any one of these confrontations between, suppose, Daiva and Asura situation, is you always have three situations or three conditions. One of them, firstly, is to potentially change the situation. Now, what do we mean by change? Well, you can always change two things. You can either change your perception about what's going on, or you can change it, that is called implicit change or explicit change. You can ask them, hey, I need you to act like this because I do not find this appropriate. But we always start with ourselves. But because we don't know if our opinion is clouded by Asura Sampat, therefore, we open up a conversation. Therefore, we receive more facts, more information from the other side. And then we say, okay, so I've tried to change my situation, my perception, my view about this. It doesn't work. It still contradicts Daiva Sampat. It contradicts Dharma. And I cannot bear this kind of closure in the environment. So I'm not willing to stand up. I'm not willing to compromise Dharma for Adharma. Not willing to do that. Okay, so you try to change something in you, you're not willing to do that, fine. Then we go on to the external. We try to open up an engagement. I feel like this when when this is presented before me, by you? And are you willing to work with me? Are you willing to create some kind of a resolution here with me? And then we see if that works. If that fails, then we go into the next process. We can accept. Accepting, what does accepting mean? So change has failed. Accepting means that I need to weigh out my options. What are the advantages of staying in this situation? And what are the disadvantages of going out, or what are the pluses and minuses? If you see that the pluses of staying are greater, then you can accept that. That means there's a certain compromise. If you see that the minuses are far greater than the pluses, then we go into the third model, and that is we literally physically exit from the situation. Because as long as that situation is there, we've already tried to change it. We're already tried to accept it. Doesn't work. Last option, exit. So these three models are quite practical in terms of how do we deal with this constant Daiva and Asura interplay in this world. I said to Alison some time ago that Sadacharaha, there was a nice book here. In one statement, it said the entire Mithya world is really just a play between ignorance and knowledge. In other words, knowledge is present. It's an interplay between that ignorance being removed and coming closer, or embracing that knowledge or that wisdom that was already there. So in other words, no matter where we go, whatever we do, it's always this interplay between one who knows a little bit more and one who may not know so much. So therefore, we have to find some method of conflict resolution. Atma sambhavita stabdhaha dhanamanamadhanvitaha yajante nama yajnaiste Dambhena vidhi purvakam ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham cha samshritaha mam atma paradeheshu pradvishanto bhyasu yakaha tanaham dvishatah kruran samsareshu naradhaman kshipam yajasaram ashubhan Asuri Shwe Vayonishu.
Those who are self-glorifying, vain, conceited, filled with pride and arrogance because of their wealth, perform rituals that are rituals in name only, not according to stipulations, but out of pretension. Yes, those who are completely given to egoism, brute strength, insolence, enjoyment, and anger, who despise me in their own and others' bodies, who are great cavaliers, who are hateful and cruel, who are the lowest of men, who are wrongdoers, I dispatch them repeatedly into a life of transmigration only in Asuri wombs.
They look upon themselves as endowed with all the noble attributes and speak of themselves in this way. Even though they do not have the virtues, they praise themselves as people possessed of divine virtues. They proclaim themselves as wonderful, do not have any respect for the people who are qualified to evaluate their merits. Naturally, they are very vain, stabdaha, demanding praise from others, and at the same time, themselves not able to bend down to anyone, either physically or mentally. Their own lack of humility and lack of respect for others prevents them from bending down to anyone else. As a result, they have no reverence for anything. Even if God were to appear to such people, they would not surrender unto him nor offer their devotion because they consider themselves as Ishvara. Though they do not respect anyone else, they think everyone should respect them. They are filled with pride because of their wealth. Mana, as we have seen, is the attitude. I am to be worshipped. And Mada is arrogance born of one's wealth, conceitedness, and they also perform rituals which are rituals only in name. When you perform a ritual, you must have Shraddha and follow the procedures prescribed by the Vedas. But the rituals done by them are not done according to the stipulations. They are not as per customs. Why do they do them? because of pretension. Their aim is only self-glorification, self-promotion, showing off oneself as someone who does all the rituals. Since there is some fire involved, something offered, and some giving away of food, etc., it is called a ritual, but it is not really a ritual unless all the rules specified by the Veda are followed. Even if all the rules are not followed, but there is adequate Shraddha, it is acceptable. But here, there is no Shraddha either.
So line 1 of verse 17, Atma sambhavitaha stabdhaha dhana mana mada anditaha. So giving honor to themselves, owing to their excessive pride, knowledge to their identity of their accomplishments, how much they've spread themselves in the world. What is the attitude of such an individual? What is their attitude in respect to spirituality, in respect to religion? Yajante nama yajnaihi te dambhena avidhi purvakam. Either they use religion to gain more for oneself, law of attraction, right? So in other words, I find a ritual, something that's supposed to give me, the universe is supposed to give me more of what I want. And therefore, this stuff sells like hotcakes, or what sells really well, coffee, I don't know. Just this stuff sells really well. So in other words, they will find these rituals in the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. We have rituals for everything, how to give birth to a child, who will be successful in life. So in other words, you perform a ritual before actually the intercourse for the child to be in the most successful possible manner. There is a ritual for success in terms of job promotion. There's a ritual for healing, so physical healing. There's a ritual for that. So there's so many rituals throughout the text that the person would like to go to and apply one of them for the sake of gaining more artha and kama, more security, more status, and more wealth. And the second is they will use religion for the sake of gaining public trust. So a politician may stand with a holy text and takes a picture of oneself, and instantly the viewers will buy this without any questioning. The country votes for such a politician because, hey, he believes in God, and so therefore we will vote for him. Further, the verse is stating that owing to that pride, which causes that insensitivity to look at the general needs of the whole, person doesn't bother about their language. In other words, one uses their language in an insensitive, a rather careless manner. So they will just say anything about anyone, no regard for professionalism, no regard for custom, no regard for tradition. Then sycophants come. What are sycophants? Those who want to borrow some power. In other words, we look for someone that's growing, and then we associate with them so that I could also borrow some power for myself. Now, what do sycophants do? They build the person's pride even further. And what does that do? It distances oneself from Ishvara Sashti even further. And what does that do? It distances or removes any possibility of someone with any sense of dharma or any sense of morality even coming closer to them, because one who is dharmic, thinking clear, they just do not want to even come near such a person. And even if one were to penetrate that circle of sycophants, even if you were to come there, you will be highly objected. You will be objected as weak. What is this compassion, kindness? What's the point of being good when even good people suffer? And so you'll get a whole bunch of objections there. Now, the next verse, 18, is they experience feelings of hatred towards God.
They transgress the universal mandates of Ishvara. What is to be done and what is not to be done is very easily appreciated just through common sense. Since it is not created by any human being, but innately known by all, we call it the order of Ishvara. The people being discussed here transgress these universal ethics, and, of course, those that are mentioned in the shastra. The transgression is considered the hatred of Ishvara, and conversely, following Dharma becomes a kind of worship of Ishvara. All ethical people, though they may not recognize Ishvara, are worshippers of Ishvara. Further, those people of Ashuri disposition are great cavillas, fault finders. If someone has some virtues, they will try to find and point out some defect. Seeing the merits of others makes them feel small, and to counteract that, they will look for what is lacking in the person. They particularly cannot tolerate the qualities, lifestyle, disciplines, and values of people who are spiritual seekers and who follow Dharma. What does Ishvara do with such people? All these people who live a life opposed to Dharma and are inimical to the people who are following a life of Dharma, Ishvara dispatches them to a life of samsara. It is not that he, God, despises them as they do him, God, but they have earned these results, which are given to them in full measure. These people who transgress Ishvara's mandate are cruel and are the lowest of men because they do not make use of their viveka, capacity to discern what is right and what is wrong. The plural, samsareshu, indicates the many different births they will take, one after the other, perpetually. Because they have gathered so many karmas, they cannot fulfill all of them in just one birth, janma. Even if they are born as a human being, it is also samsara. But for some, these people will be born only in asuri wombs. Because in their human birth, they pounced like tigers and kicked like donkeys, stung like scorpions and gobbled voraciously like varieties of animals, they get a chance to live in a form where they can exhaust that very cruelty. They will become objects of fear. Anything that frightens you legitimately, like a snake that is poisonous and merciless, is an asuri yoni. As a human being with a capacity to think and to choose, I'm supposed to heed my conscience and follow Dharma. If, instead, I become a terror for everybody, the law of karma, which is perfect in its justice, will place me in an asuri yoni next time. Therefore, the Lord says, I dispatch them to asuri yonis again and again.
Given to one's power, desire for power, arrogance, pride, anger, desire for wealth and money, disregarding the environment, which further erodes one's devotion for divinity. These slanderers, Krishna says, they hate me. The one who obtains in their very body, the one Lord, the one awareness that is shining on their minds. What they don't realize is, I can only hate because of God. And therefore, these slanderers hate me, who is in their very body, but also in the very bodies of every other individual, the ones whom they are fault finding. That's what a cavalier is. In other words, you have virtues. Let me go and look for some flaws in you. And therefore, we find some flaws in you and we post those flaws online. And therefore, they're unable to see anything except the flaws. Why? Because the flaws represent one's own inner flaws. Whatever the person holds, they therefore project that outwards. So the one God who is blessing his or her mind, that God is being insulted. And then the next verse is, what is the destiny of an asura or rakshasa? What is their destiny after physical death? Context before I go forward. So verse 7 to 21 is talking about asura sampat and rakshasa sampat. And Krishna is dividing basically this asura sampat into two categories. The first one is asura sampat. So this is whereby raja guna is dominant. This causes spiritual stagnation. It's kind of like being in a little puddle and or maybe the ocean, and the person is not really moving forward nor backwards. The wave, the dharmic wave, is moving one way, but the person is kind of moving forward and moving back. So they're staying in one place and therefore they're having spiritual stagnation. Whereas the rakshasa sampat, is tamaguna dominant. And by the way, these three gunas will be extensively covered in the next chapter. This is whereby the person will actually go against the wave, and they will take advantage of the wave, and they will hurt other waves around them for their own ends. So this asura and rakshasa sampat is being talked about in 7 to 21. And I also want to, again, bring this onto you before we go into others. So every individual, just to be born, has all of these three qualities. Daiva sampat, which is sattva guna dominant mind. Asura sampat, raja guna dominant mind. And rakshasa sampat, which is tamaguna dominant mind. However, the question is, what is all creation of? All three gunas. Therefore, anything born will have some proportion of these three gunas. And I'll just give you an example just to see how that is true. Suppose you want to help others, but you help them reluctantly. We can relate with this, right? No, I'm going to help you, but behind the mind is, I'm going to help you reluctantly. I don't want to quite help you, but I'm obligated to help you. That is one example of how there is a daiva sampat, but there's also an asura sampat there working also. We give away stuff for free, don't we? But then we give away stuff for free that we don't want. So in other words, we're not really giving away, but we're just kind of saving some money on the trash collectors from having to take our stuff away. And then we're justifying that as, take my stuff away, I'm giving it to you. The real giving is giving those things that are close and personal to you, that you really cherish, because the nature of love is to give of itself. Why? Because to hold something back, it hurts. And therefore, love wants to pour itself out. We, for example, speak the truth, but reluctantly, or only when it's safe to do so, right? It's okay, I'm going to speak the truth, but as long as it doesn't compromise my reputation, then I'll speak the truth. So once again, there are these two attributes. We are kind to some, but we are despiteful to others. Once again, two qualities are operating. We accept the presence of the Lord, according to the scriptures. But then the chapter comes and says, here, I have for you a plan to get out of this rebirth, salvation, moksha. And then we doubt that. So wait a minute, I accepted the presence of the Lord and I doubt his word of moksha. Again, we buy one thing, but then we reject the other thing. Even we do this to all knowledge, all power. We love being good, don't we? We all love being good, but we don't mind being naughty once in a while. So this is true for all of us. So once again, why am I saying this? To not feel guilty, because sometimes the most common error we make is we try to be perfect in the world of mithya. Is there such thing as perfection in mithya? No. Why? Because number one, everything is infused with these three gunas. Number two, just to be a human being, you will always lack knowledge. Therefore, you will make mistakes unknowingly, and that is okay. So therefore, this is about accepting oneself to be the individual that they are, and there is nothing wrong with that. All you can do is make a correction and move on, but don't look back, because you are doing the best that you can. So in other words, anything in mithya is limited. Anything that is limited cannot possibly be perfect. Aham kshipami, so I throw, tan dvishtaha asurishu. So I throw those haters of me into asura wombs. In other words, since these asura and rakshasas use their body for their own fulfillment, which is what the body was not originally intended for, being given the capacity of free will, having violated that capacity, having disrespected that capacity to use one's vehicle to be an expression of one's swadharma, to serve the community, to serve the environment, having violated all that, next life, says Krishna, for that reason, for that only reason, I give them either an inferior body or like an animal body or a plant body, or send them to a lower time-space realm. Now we have to pause a little bit here, because now you're going to say, so how can Ishvara now be a karta, a doer? So what is this now? Ishvara now select, okay, so you were naughty, you were exercising majority of Asura, Rakshasa, Sampat, you are going into a tortoise, and then you're going to get a roadkill, right? It doesn't happen like that. What more accurate way to look at it is the person simply doesn't need to follow Dharma. So suppose someone is in a Asuric Rakshasa, Sampat dominant mode, and for them, Dharma is simply not important. So now the question is, why should I be born in a body whereby Dharma is important? It doesn't make sense. Therefore, the person's own capacity, their own mind state, their own mental condition makes them select a body that is most suitable for exhausting their predominant samskara. I used some example before. There was two old couples and they really enjoyed to copulate together. And so they said, when you go to heaven, tell me if there's if there's intercourse there. And so one of them came back, one of them died and they came back and said, yes, there is. The wife asked, so where are you? And said, I'm a rabbit in the grass. In other words, you were reborn as a rabbit because rabbits have a much greater chance of exhausting whatever that samskara was entailing. So that's just a nice story to tell you how it's not that Ishvara assigns you're going to get a rabbit body, but rather it is the most appropriate instrument, a vehicle for exhausting that samskara. Or supposed to assert dominance. I want to be dominant and kind of, assert my territory. Then why do you need a human body for that? Rather get a lion's body and be the leader of the pact. And therefore you exhaust that karma, that samskara much quicker than being in a human body. Because in a human body, we cannot quite do that. There's always opposition. Next verse, what's the life like of one who is reborn as an Asura Rakshasa? Asurim yonim apannaha modha janmani mama prapyaiva kaunteya tato yantyadhaman gatim trividham narakasyedam dvaram nashanam atmanaha kamah krodhas tatha lobhaha tasmad etat trayam tyajet.
Kaunteya Arjuna, those who lack discrimination, obtaining the form of an asura in every birth, certainly not reaching me, go to an end that is even lower than that. This doorway to painful experience that destroys a person is threefold: desire, anger, and greed. Therefore, one should give up this triad.
Apanaha asuri yonim. So entering the asuri womb, mudhaha aprapya mam eva, the indiscriminative ones do not reach me. And why do they not reach me? Because Jiva Srishti's own world prevents them from even seeing the Vyavaharika world, the Ishvara Srishti world. Therefore, the person is too consumed with their own notions, preserving the status quo of their established beliefs and their old behavioral patterns. And for this reason, their adharma, their sense of conducting oneself, is perpetuating. How so? Adharmic samskara causes no dharmic person to be around them. A dharmic person simply is not going to come around an adharmic person because they're two opposites. And because no dharmic person is there to save them, what happens? They get more permission to perform more asura sampat because there's no one to oppose them. There's no one to tell them, stop, this is not right. And for that reason, they distance themselves even further away from God, from the world of facts, the factual world, more established in their own private world, and therefore even less chance of someone coming to save such a person. And this is why it's important to say no the first time. This is the safest way not to fall into asura sampat. When we say no the first time, what is that? That's called free will. You're exercising your rationale to say no. But the moment it's the second time, it is already free will, a little bit of samskara. Third time, free will is not even a question. You don't need that samskara. Already too late. Now makes you question, what are you a product of? You're a product of thoughts. What are those thoughts? Those things that you have said yes to at some point before. Therefore, we're always building new samskaras. There was never a moment where we began building samskaras at one time. Sometime long ago, I started to build samskaras, and now I am this person. The person, a product of lifetimes and lifetimes of saying no and sometimes not saying no. And therefore, those things that we didn't say no to, they became our samskaras. And what happened? Next life, we naturally felt like doing those things. We felt attracted to those things. And this explains again, as we said last week, why some kids are naturally attracted to asuric dispositions, and some of them, the more different types, are into different things. And so these interests determine the person's dispositions. That's why we have little groups in school. You know, the intellectuals, the cool kids, the troublemakers, you know, the kids that always around the girls, and then the groups simply don't get along. And then one group bullies another group. So this is all a demonstration of those things that individual through lifetimes has not said no to. And therefore they fell for the trap, and it became a samskara, an impression, which next life causes them to be attracted to bullying, for example. So the next verse will talk about what specific traits pull them down the farthest. So there's 3 traits that made them go down farthest to naraka, to hell. And they are kamaha, krodha, and lobha. Kama, desire. Then we have krodha, anger, and lobha, which is greed. Now let's talk about desire. Now we already know what desire is. Desire is a tendency to say yes to something. In other words, it is samskara. So let's talk about overcoming desires. Suppose there are some desires that you may not quite feel are healthy. So how do we manage that? And we said last week that there's no question of eliminating desires, because desire is a Ishvara Srishti program. So we have to redirect that desire to the right channels. And there are several ways to do this. The first is what we call the path of knowledge. So before I go into this, why are we talking about this now? We're talking about this to address those unhealthy tendencies that we have, and then we want to kind of just move them towards something that's more healthy. So then the question is, how do we do that? The first path is path of knowledge. And this is whereby you can inquire, you can use your intellect. Does this object really have any happiness? Right? Is the happiness in this object? And you say, well, it's not, because if it was in the object, then everyone would be wanting this object the same. So therefore, it has to be my own conclusion that the happiness is there. And further, you can say all finite objects must have, therefore, finite levels of contentment. Therefore, you cannot give me the contentment that I'm really seeking, which is limitless contentment. You can immediately redirect your attention or your desire onto something bigger. So again, this is important. No question of eliminating, because there's nothing wrong with desire. Desire is a privilege of a human being. This is how the shastras look at desire. And so therefore, we simply redirect it to something that stands much bigger towards Ishvaraha, that represents in our mind, than what we are looking at right now. For me, for example, it's always Nima. Whenever I tend to be naughty, Nima immediately comes at the back of my mind with a strict voice, and she immediately goes, okay, now I'm onto it straight, sharp. So it's always nice to have that guru or that symbol that always speaks at the back of your mind, to which your mind automatically goes onto, and it realigns you back onto, to what do I wish to channel my desires to right now. Therefore, redirect your desires onto something bigger than this small object that is beholding you. How this object will cause dependence. Now, some people don't mind being dependent. In fact, some people enjoy being dependent, and there's nothing wrong with being dependent, unless it is unhealthy dependence, whereby I cannot do without it. You can say it produces maintenance anxiety, right? Do you really want to go through all of that effort to maintain it in your life? If you're okay with that, sometimes we don't mind maintaining things. We actually enjoy that because that's how your love may express through maintaining your child, maintaining that relationship, maintaining something that is around you. So you say, but there's nothing wrong with that. And we say, that's fine. You can move on to path of sense restraint. If path of knowledge didn't do the redirection properly, path of sense restraint. And this is deliberately directing your senses towards the environment that reminds you of divinity. In other words, you physically remove yourself from the environment that summons those asuric traits. This is one of the fastest ways to immediately come back to this sensible person. Why? Because as long as the trigger is there, it's very hard to manage that. Is that not your experience? As long as that trigger is there, the trigger that makes you think in an asuric way, even if you use all your rationale and all of your self-knowledge, that trigger is still there. It's very, very hard to officially be free of that. So we say path of sense restraint. You physically make a decision, and therefore you put yourself in an environment that represents that bigger reality. We have path of devotion. This is whereby you redirect your desire or your greed, redirect your desire or your greed towards the Lord. Again, no question of eliminating. Redirect towards the Lord? Greed? What do you mean by that? Oh Lord, I really want to know the final reality. I want to know myself not different from you, firmly, strongly, directly. I want to feel that love right now. I am greedy for it. Redirect that greed and the desire for the limitless one. Just like we have the gopis. The gopis are a wonderful example of this, of Vrindavan. Crazy little girls, huh? We think it's romantic between Krishna and the gopis. No, this is a lovely symbolism. Always thinking of Krishna, obsessed over Krishna. The moment Krishna leaves, they're talking about Krishna. They're making jokes about Krishna. They're going upstairs, secretly talking about Krishna. All they're doing is Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. In other words, they're obsessed. Their greed and desire is onto Krishna, the Lord. Path of devotion. We can redirect our anger towards the Lord. What do you mean by this? How do I do this? How do I be angry towards God? God, I am tired of life after life, of this limited body, of these 5 sheets. I want to know you, not different from myself. I want to know this knowledge. Redirect all of that anger intelligently towards the Lord. I want to end the cycle of rebirth. I had enough. Not because I don't like it, but because I've seen the limitations of it. Therefore, I am ready to end the cycle and enjoy my inherent nature as freedom itself, which is not different from the one that I am worshiping, the Lord. We can also apply prayer, path of devotion. This involves developing your relationship with this divinity. That's what prayer is there. You're having a relationship with the divine, and you become like one of the gopis, unable to think of anything else except God. You're literally boring to be around because your entire world is just the Lord. In other words, you want nothing more than that which is most delicious, most attractive, most beautiful, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahman. The next path is the path of action, karma yoga. This involves accepting every experience that shows up in your life, every chapter, as a personally customized experience cooked up by Bhagavan just for you. Think about that. Every experience from now on is cooked up just for you by the all knowledge, all power. And therefore, you can start to rather look at it now in an appreciative sense, then become a cavalier, finding faults. Where can I find faults? Why me? No, This is a special experience. Let's make the most out of it. It's an opportunity. This also involves doing your duty wholeheartedly, wholehearted listening, wholehearted attention. You are my world right now, wholeheartedly, wholehearted study, wholehearted listening, wholehearted friendship, wholehearted relationship. Therefore, do your duty wholeheartedly, but remember that the results may not even show up in this lifetime, because your duty is on concentrating your results to a higher altar. Where's the question of expecting results back? Because no matter when I get it, it's always going to come back from the higher altar. And then we got the path of meditation, dhyana yoga. This is one of the paths that is the hardest, because it doesn't involve any action. It's entirely mind-oriented. You sit down and then you let all of those thoughts come. Just be there and let them show up on the screen of the mind, and don't act upon them. What does this do? That itself exhausts the tendency to want to comply with them. Because how do all samskaras get rejuvenated? By doing them. But what are you doing meditation? You're not doing them. You're simply letting them come on the screen of the mind and you're observing them. So the first one is desire. How to manage desire, we spoke. Anger, this is whereby you have the expectations are not met. Again, if you say, but see, I really want my expectations to be met. Suppose you made that argument. I want expectations to be met. Then again, what you say is, okay, so let me rather change those expectations towards myself. How do I expect to see the situation? I expect myself to see them in the best light possible, because we usually expect others to be in a certain method. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but sometimes others are not just able to deliver. So you redirect those expectations onto yourself. Let me be a more understanding person, a more patient person. I expect myself next time to be a little bit more smiley, a little bit more gentler. There are two types of greed. The first one is reluctance to share what you have. And the second version of greed is desire for more. Tasmat tyajet etat trayam. Give up these three poisons. In other words, give up means convert. Again, you cannot give up anything in this universe, because nothing in the universe can go out of existence. What junk existence is it going to go into? There's only one non-dual existence. Therefore, there's never a question of giving up anything, but rather removing those clouds, those notions, which are distancing me from thinking in the light of dharmic principles, daiva sampada. Therefore, we are in a sense converting, but converting just means removing ignorance. How about converting that desire to feel good all the time into desire to be released from this rebirth? Just convert. Not a question of feeling good. In fact, your desire for ending the rebirth may not even feel good at all. It may not be that exciting, it may not be that interesting. Or it may, it doesn't matter. But what does this have to anything to do with the Ishvara Srishtihi? Because feeling good or not feeling good, that is Ishvara Srishtihi. The duty of the jiva is to look at the highest goal. Whatever the byproduct of that looking at the highest goal is, that is Ishvara Srishtihi. So therefore, it may make you feel good or it may not make you feel good. But the jiva's eye is on the highest goal. Lastly, the verse is saying that you don't have to worry about these last two, which is greed and anger. Why not? Why do you not have to worry about anger and greed? What's the source of them?
Desire.
In other words, if I redirect one's desire onto the bigger, automatically anger and greed fall away. So don't worry about the last two. Redirect the desire, says Krishna. Etair vimuktah kaunteya tamodvarais tribhir naraha acharatyatmanah shreyaha tato yati param gatim yakshastra vidhim utsrjya vartate kamakarataha nasa siddhim avapnoti nasukham na param gatim.
A man who is free from these three gates to darkness, Kunteya, Arjuna, follows what is good for himself. Because of that, he reaches the highest end. The one who, being impelled by binding desire, engages oneself casting away the injunctions of the shastra, gains neither maturity nor happiness here, much less a higher end.
Tasma chastram pramanam te karya vyavastitau nyatva shastra vidhanoktam karma kartum iharhasi.
Therefore, shastra is the means of knowledge for you, Arjuna, in the determination of what is to be done and what is not to be done. Knowing what is said by the mandates of the shastra, you are obliged to perform action here in this world.
So Krishna is going to say that merely living these sattvic traits of Daivi Sampat in verse 1 to 3, that is still not enough. You have to complete that circuit, and that circuit is pursuit of moksha. In other words, there is no such thing as path of artha, kama, or dharma. How do we demonstrate that there's no such thing as security, path of virtue, and path of pleasure? Think about desire. Why do you fulfill a desire? You don't fulfill a desire for the sake of desire. Why do you fulfill a desire? You fulfill a desire to be free from the pangs or the itch of that desire. Is that not true? I got a desire, so let me express this desire so I can be free of this itch of this desire. Freedom. What about artha? Do we wish to possess? Do we possess just for the sake of having more objects? No. We possess so that we can be free from the uncertainty of the unknown, free from the anxiety of that something may happen if I don't have this object in my life. I want to be free of that, and therefore we possess. I want to be free from the anxiety of the unknown. The economy may crash, so let me get money so that that anxiety doesn't become true. Therefore, I want to be free of that. Make money. Freedom once again. What about dharma? Do you really want to be wise? Is that why you're here, to be wise, a wise person? You don't want to be wise. You want to be free from the guilt and shame that arises if dharma is violated. Think about this. Is this not true? You do the wrong thing, and then you have to bear that guilt and shame of feeling wrong. I've done something. I've got into trouble. So therefore, I want to follow dharma, do the right thing so I can be free from being in trouble. Freedom, kama, freedom, artha, freedom, dharma. What does this mean? There can only be one possible goal in life: freedom. Freedom from everything, including virtue. Therefore, moksha can be the only possible goal. Vimuktaha etaihi tribhihi. Free from these three: desire, krodhaha, lobhaha, greed, anger. Then what? Naraha acharati shreyaha tataha yati param gatim. One pursues the path of the good, and eventually, through the course of time, param gatim attains the supreme end. So once again, Krishna here is saying is convert the asura sampat through mindfulness, being alert. What am I saying? What words are coming out to me? Slowly convert these mistakes into daiva sampat. And through the course of time, your mind sharpens up, your mind matures up. And interestingly enough, Krishna doesn't say how to do this. Do you know why? Because think about the context where this is taking place in the Vedic culture. The Vedic culture is percolated by wisdom. The lifestyle of the Vedic culture is one that it infuses the individual with growth. It motivates the person to think dharmically. We've got brahmacharya, 7 to 25, all about dharma. 25 to 55, grahasta, 55 to 75, vanaprastha, 75 to 95, sannyasa. How did it all start? Brahmacharya through dharma. So the whole life has been set up whereby the person is naturally doing their self-growth automatically. So therefore, Krishna doesn't answer how specifically, because this is taking place at a time where this was normal. But only today we have to bring up these concepts of you have to purify your mind. Krishna then says, once you have purified your mind, lived according to these Daiva principles, then what? Krishna says, I send him or her the guru because they do not know any better themselves. If I am ignorant, what do I know? Who is the proper guru? The only thing an ignorant mind can know is who is a proper guru in respect to what? Your samskaras, your likes and dislikes. But that doesn't mean it is in the name of the absolute. It means it's in the name of the jiva srishtihi. Therefore, once the mind is cleared up, Krishna says, I send that individual the guru that they deserve according to their values, according to the clarity of their mind, according to their maturity. And that person and they get connected together, and Ishvara speaks through the guru to deliver the wisdom of the entire universe, of the entire reality. Therefore, the individual always receives the guru that they deserve according to their level of maturity. Otherwise, verse 23, Utsrja shastra vidhim avapnoti siddhim na sukham na param gatim. Otherwise, having given up the scriptural injunctions, living in their jiva srishtihi world, in other words, their bubble of notions, attains neither purity nor enjoys sukham, extended contentment, nor param gatim, nor attains the supreme goal. In other words, lives with a sense of separation. The separation has continued from the last life. And for that reason, the person has to look for bigger and louder. Why so? Because the senses have been desensitized. What does desensitized mean? It means that the person has indulged so much in pleasure that the senses have lost sensitivity. In other words, the thing like a little rainbow in the sky, free rainbow is so beautiful to see, that has lost its glow. People have lost their glow. Jokes have lost their glow. Entertainment has lost its glow. What's the only option to resort? Bigger and louder.
Shastra, meaning the Veda, is a pramana, not only for Arjuna, but for everybody. Pramana is a means of knowledge, not, as it is often translated, a guide or authority. The word itself reveals the meaning, that which is instrumental in giving rise to Brahma, knowledge, is pramana. What kind of knowledge? The knowledge required in determining what is to be done and what is not to be done in a given situation. Whenever I want to know whether it is proper for me to do something or not, what kind of prayers I have to do when, and the method of doing them, how much wealth I can have, and how much I should distribute, and so on. I will find it told in the injunctions of the Shastra. For example, it is said by the Shastra, do not hurt and do not speak falsehood. And the karma for each varna and ashrama is very clearly mentioned in the Shastra. But today, because of the breakdown of those systems, we have to convert these injunctions with reference to varna and ashrama into what is to be done and not to be done in general. Shastra tells us one's actions attract punya and papa, which are the adrishta phalas, and therefore one has to be mindful of one's actions. Here, iha, in this world, you stand to do karma, karma kritum arhasi. The mention of iha here is to draw attention to the fact that on this earth, as a human being, you have the freedom to act or not to act. In other worlds like heaven, Swarga, on the other hand, we do not have this freedom. We can only exhaust karma. We cannot do more karma or gather punya or papa. Even on this planet, there are shades of difference in that India is considered a better place to gather karma phala. A karma bhumi, while the United States of America is looked upon as a place where we predominantly experience the results of karma, a bhoga bhumi. But everywhere on this planet, as human beings, we do enjoy the freedom to choose our actions and learn. In Gandharva Loka, on the other hand, all the time is passed in enjoyment of music. What can we learn there? This human birth in which we have that freedom is very rare and precious. And that freedom to learn and to do karma and earn karma phala here in this world is to be used, not abused. If you analyze the Shastra, this is the essence of what it says about actions. Knowing the karma that the Shastra has enjoined, you stand to do it kartum arhasi. Thus, Bhagavan concludes this chapter in which he talks about Daivi Sampat and Asuri Sampat and concludes by telling Arjuna that he should always go by the Shastra in deciding what is to be done and what is not to be done. Om Tat Sat.
So Krishna says here that the scriptures are a valid means of knowledge because they are revealed by that one who is the creator of everything, including the scriptures, through which that creator can expound his laws and orders and how to live in line with them. All knowledge, all power, nothing is missing. So that implies that that creator must have already accounted for everything in existence already, including the desire of the individual who finds himself as a limited individual in this world and who comes to a point through the capacities of his or her free will and their logic, they say, I want to stop this existence of this limited body, limited mind. So this means that creator, who is all knowledge, all power, must have already also included that possibility for the jiva to come out of his or her limitation. Therefore, he is the one through which we can look for a way out. Now, the question is, how do you look for a way out through of limitation? How do you look for a way out? Well, again, all knowledge, all power must have also addressed that question. And how was that question addressed? By providing a manual through what we call vehicles, that is the rishis, by getting into a certain mode of thinking and through which that knowledge can come through, and that's why we have the Vedas. In other words, the individual, small individual with a high discerning ability comes to a point and says, what's the point of coming back? It's all limited anyway. That already must have already been addressed. I want to end this dualistic existence. That too must have already been addressed. Therefore, a manual must also come into play called the Vedas. And this manual must answer certain questions. What kind of questions must it answer? It must answer questions that are always one step ahead of the limited jiva. So no matter what the jiva asks, that manual, coming from all knowledge, all power, must already provide the answer. What kind of questions? Everything about the universe. Right? What's the nature of this universe? How did this universe come about? What is it made of? What's the nature of the individual? Of me, the perceiver, who's asking these questions about the universe. What is the nature of that individual and the relationship between that individual and the universe? Who or what is the creator of both the universe and the individual who is having an inquiry about the creator, the individual, and the universe? That also must have already been there by all knowledge, all power, considering he is all knowledge, all power. And what is the ways to conduct oneself in this huge world? Therefore, do's and don'ts also must have already been provided by that all knowledge, all power. And that manual, considering this is Advaita Vedanta, we call it the Vedas. If you say, what about other scriptures? I'm not speaking on the behalf of other scriptures. I'm speaking about the Vedas specifically. Therefore, knowing this, Jnatva shastra vidhana uktam arhasi kartum karma iha in this world. Arjuna, being exposed to these scriptural injunctions, the right course of action would be to actively use your viveka to discern, to become mindful, what is asura sampat, what is daiva sampat. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.